So, let's go. Number 1. The Toromona. In 1997, a Norwegian explorer named Lars Hafskjold walked into the green wall of the Paititi forest in northern Bolivia, searching for a people almost no outsider had ever met. He was never seen again. No body, no camp, no final message. The jungle simply closed behind him, the way it is said to close behind the Toromona themselves. The Toromona are an indigenous group of the Paititi region in the northern La Paz department of Bolivia, deep in the upper Amazon lowlands. Their language and culture are tied to the Tacana and Esa Eja peoples of the Beni and Madre de Dios river basins. Spanish colonial and missionary records from the 17th and 18th centuries name Toromona bands who resisted every attempt to enter their forest. And around those records grew one of the most enduring legends in South America. As the Spanish under Francisco Pizarro tore down the Inca Empire in the 1530s, golden refugees were said to have been carried east into the jungle, and the Toromona were said to guard it. In that telling, they are the wardens of a lost city. This is where the story turns strange. By modern times, no one could prove the Toromona still existed. There is no confirmed photograph. There is no census. There is no verified account of a living Toromona band in the recent record. And yet, in 2006, the Bolivian government did something remarkable. It created a legal exclusion zone, the Reserva Toromona, inside Paititi National Park, to protect a people whose survival cannot be demonstrated. Think about that. A nation set aside a piece of one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, some 19,000 square kilometers of protected wilderness, for the sake of a people who may already be ghosts. The reasoning behind this is the principle of no contact, the same policy used in Peru and Brazil for peoples living in what the law calls voluntary isolation. Bolivia's 2009 constitution enshrines protection for exactly such groups. And the crucial thing to understand is that isolation here does not mean ignorance. These are not people unaware that the outside world exists. They are people who know it exists and have chosen, often after generations of violence, to stay away from it. The Amazon rubber boom, which ran roughly from 1879 to 1912, was a period of enslavement and slaughter that emptied whole river systems and drove survivors deep into the headwater forests. To vanish was to live. Anthropologists like Álvaro Díaz-Astete, who has spent years documenting the isolated and highly vulnerable peoples of the Bolivian Amazon, cannot say for certain whether the Toromona persist as a distinct band or have quietly merged into neighboring groups like the Esa Eja and the Araona. The Araona themselves, a people of only a few hundred, were nearly lost before contact in the 20th century. That is how thin the thread can be. So the Toromona sit exactly on the border between still out there and already gone. Illegal logging and deforestation press against the edges of Paititi every year, narrowing the space where any hidden people could survive. Expeditions to find the lost city are sometimes denied permits precisely to avoid stumbling onto them. And here is the stakes of it. If the Toromona are still in there, they are among the most isolated human beings alive, and the reserve is the last wall between them and a world that has already killed people like them by simply breathing on them. If they are not, then Bolivia is guarding an empty forest around a memory. No one knows which, and that uncertainty leads directly to the next people on this list, who are not vanishing at all. They are appearing. Number 2. The Mashco-Piro. In July of 2024, a photograph reached the outside world that looked like a scene from deep prehistory. Dozens of near-naked figures, carrying bows, stood on a pale riverbank in southeastern Peru, staring across the brown water. They were not actors. They were not a lost tribe from a century ago. They were the Mashco-Piro, and the picture was taken a short distance from an active logging concession in the present day. The Mashco-Piro are an uncontacted people of the Madre de Dios region of Peru, in the Amazon lowlands. Among themselves, they use the word nomole, meaning brothers and sisters. They speak a dialect related to Yin, an Arawakan language, which means that contacted Yin people can sometimes partly understand shouted words across a river. Their ancestors, like the Toromonas, fled into the deep forest during the rubber boom atrocities, in their case linked to the notorious rubber baron Carlos Fitzgerald. They have lived ever since in and around Manu National Park and the Madre de Dios and Las Piedras river systems. For most of the 20th century, they were rumored more than seen. But beginning around 2011, the sightings changed. The Mashco-Piro started appearing at the forest edge and on riverbanks openly, in daylight, in numbers. In 2011, a Matsugenka man named Nicolas Flores, known as Shako, who had for years left gifts for them, was killed by a Mashco-Piro arrow. In 2015, a young man in the village of Shipetiari was killed the same way. These are not gentle encounters. These are the frictions of a people who do not want to be approached, coming closer to a world that will not stop approaching. And there are a lot of them. Estimates put the Mashco-Piro population at 750 or more, which makes them one of the largest uncontacted groups anywhere on the planet. Peru's Ministry of Culture manages a network of indigenous reserves and a strict no-contact policy through a directorate dedicated to isolated peoples. The anthropologist Glenn Shepard, who has studied them and the ethics around them for decades, has described the agonizing choice at the center of their story. Because here is the hinge. Some experts argue the Mashco-Piro must be left in complete isolation, that any contact is a violation and a danger. Others argue that contact is now effectively inevitable, that with logging closing in and the group itself walking to the rivers, the humane path is to manage that contact carefully rather than let it happen by accident. There is no clean answer. Their toolkit is Stone Age simple in the technical sense. Bows and arrows and digging sticks. No metal, no settled farming. Their bodies carry no immunity to the ordinary diseases the rest of us shrug off. A single introduction of measles or influenza could kill a large fraction of them in weeks. The Regional Indigenous Federation, FENIMAD, monitors their movements and fights for their land. The 2024 photographs were taken near a company logging concession, sharpening a conflict that is really about whether the last forest they can disappear into will still be standing. And that is the terrifying part of the Mashco-Piro. They are not a relic. They are a living, growing population of people practicing a way of life older than agriculture. And we are watching them step, one riverbank at a time, out of the deep past and toward a doorway that may kill them. The gold their ancestors were said to protect leads us to the next question. What if the city itself is still out there? Number 3. Paititi. In 2001, an Italian researcher named Mario Poglia was working through the dust of the Vatican's archives when he found a Jesuit report describing something extraordinary, a large, gold-rich city hidden in the interior of the South American jungle. A fortress city with a name that has haunted explorers for 4 centuries. Paititi. Paititi is the great lost city of the eastern Andes, said to lie somewhere in the cloud forest or lowland jungle on the frontier where Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil dissolve into trees. The legend runs parallel to the Toromonas. As the Inca Empire fell in the 1530s, gold and people were carried east, away from the Spanish, into the region the Inca called the Antisuyu. The most cited documentary route is a Jesuit account attributed to a missionary named Andres Lopez around the year 1600, describing exactly such a city. Layered on top of that is older Inca oral tradition of a wealthy realm in the east. It is important to separate this from the confirmed history, which we will come to. Vilcabamba, the Inca's last capital, is real and has been found. Paititi has not. It remains legend. But it is a legend that serious people keep chasing. The French explorer Thierry Jamin has led multiple modern expeditions in the Quimbiri and Megantoni regions of Cusco. Searchers focus on the Pantiacala Ridge and the Madre de Dios headwaters. Some point to the petroglyphs at Pucharo, deep in Manu National Park, and read them as a map, though most scholars disagree. Here is why the legend refuses to die, and this is a genuine turn, not a manufactured one. The Inca Road network, the Kapaknyan, really did extend into the eastern montane forests, so there was real Inca presence beyond the highlands. And in the last 2 decades, LiDAR and satellite imagery have revealed previously unknown earthworks and structures right across Amazonia. Sites like Choquequirao and Espiritu Pampa prove that jungle can swallow monumental stone architecture and hide it for centuries. So the question of whether an unknown, possibly intact city still waits under the canopy is no longer purely romantic. It has become, in a limited way, a testable hypothesis. Mainstream archaeology treats Paititi as a legend probably rooted in real but exaggerated Eastern Inca outposts, rather than a single golden metropolis. The fringe end of the spectrum ties it to Atlantis, or to visitors from the stars, claims with no archaeological support whatsoever. But between the cautious scholars and the dreamers sits the plain fact that the forest is enormous, that remote sensing keeps finding things, and that Peru sometimes restricts expeditions into its parks specifically to protect both isolated peoples and undocumented sites. The stakes of Paititi are not really about gold. They are about the unsettling possibility that a lost civilization's last city is sitting intact in the dark, and about the long list of searchers, Lars Hafskjold among the spiritual company, who walked in after it and did not come back. From a hidden city, we turn now to a hidden people whose forest is being taken from them by the hour. Number 4. The Ayoreo-Totobiegosode. Somewhere in the dry thorn forest of the Paraguayan Chaco, a small band of people moves through the scrub, glancing back over their shoulders. Behind them, on the flat horizon, a yellow bulldozer throws up a wall of dust. They are the Totobiegosode, and they are watching their world be erased in real time. The Ayoreo are an indigenous people of the Gran Chaco, the vast semi-arid thorn forest spanning Paraguay and Bolivia. The Totobiegosode, whose name means people from the place of the wild pigs, are a subgroup, and some of their bands remain uncontacted. That makes them the last indigenous people living in voluntary isolation in all of South America outside the Amazon basin. Their world is not rainforest. It is hot, low, spiny, dry country, and it is one of the fastest disappearing habitats on Earth, cleared at a furious pace for cattle ranching. Traditionally, the Ayoreo combined hunting and gathering with a little seasonal horticulture, planting squash, beans, and maize where the land allowed. Their contact history is a warning written in death. Through the mid-20th century, evangelists from the New Tribes Mission organized what were essentially manhunts, driving isolated Ayoreo bands out of the forest. In 1979, and again in later forced contacts into the 2000s, groups brought out of isolation began dying almost immediately of respiratory disease, sicknesses their bodies had never encountered. This is the same immunity gap that shadows every people on this list, and here it is not theoretical. It has already filled graves. Today, the Totobiegosode are defended by their own organization, known by the initials OPT, and by the NGO GATT, alongside international groups like Survival International, which has campaigned against agribusiness firms bulldozing their ancestral land. Satellite imagery has documented forest being cleared directly beside areas where isolated Totobiegosode are known to move. At its peak, the Chaco has lost hundreds of hectares a day. The people have a pending land claim over an ancestral territory in the Omoticodi region, a claim that is quite literally a race against the tree line. There is a hard ethical hinge here, too. Forced contact has sometimes been framed as rescue, as bringing people into the modern world for their own good. The testimonies of Ayoreo, who were driven out, tell a different story. They describe the forest as home and the cleared, cattle-stamped land as a wound. Their language belongs to the Zamocoan family, shared with the neighboring Chamakoko, and it carries a way of understanding that place that cannot survive the place's destruction. So the stakes of the Ayoreo-Totobiegosode are the sharpest and most immediate on this entire list. For them, the loss of forest is not an inconvenience. It is the loss of the ability to remain hidden, and when the hiding ends, the dying often begins. This is not a story about a distant past. It is a human rights and biodiversity emergency happening as you listen. And it raises a question the next people on this list answer in a different way. What happens to a prehistoric civilization that does not flee contact, but survives it? Number 5. The Kogi. High on a green ridge above a sea of cloud, a man in a white robe and a tall white hat looked into a film camera and delivered a warning to the rest of humanity. He called himself an elder brother. He called us the younger brother, the reckless child who was killing the world. The year was 1990, and the man was a Kogi Mama, a priest of one of the last living threads of a pre-Columbian civilization. The Kogi, who call themselves the Kagaba, live in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, an isolated pyramid of mountains on Colombia's Caribbean coast that rises from the sea to nearly 5,800 meters. They are widely regarded as the most intact surviving descendants of the Toromona, the civilization that built stone-terraced cities across these slopes. The greatest of those cities, Ciudad Perdida, or Tayuna, was begun around the year 800, roughly 6 centuries before Machu Picchu, and its stone terraces and paths were only rediscovered by looters in 1972. When the Spanish arrived, with their steel and their diseases, the Toromona did not simply die out. Survivors withdrew, high and deliberately, into the folds of the Sierra Nevada, and they carried their world with them. Today, 4 peoples descend from that sphere: the Kogi, the Wiwa, the Arhuaco, and the Kankuamo. The Kogi in particular have preserved their language, their religion, and their settlements with astonishing continuity. Their spiritual leaders, the Mamas, are chosen as young children and trained for years, sometimes in darkness, to communicate with what they call a Luna, the invisible spiritual reality they believe underlies and sustains the physical world. Their material life is a living museum of technique that is nonetheless entirely current. They farm terraces, spin cotton, and use the poporo, a gourd filled with lime that is consumed with coca leaves in a practice thousands of years old. The anthropologist Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov conducted the foundational studies of them in the mid-20th century, and the filmmaker Alan Herrera brought them to the world in that 1990 BBC film, and again in 2012 with a follow-up bluntly titled Aluna. Their home in the Sierra Nevada is a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, one of the most biologically rich places on the planet for its size. Here is the reframing that makes the Kogi so powerful, and it is a real one, not a trick. For centuries, Europeans looked at peoples like this and saw the primitive, the backward, the leftover. The Kogi invert that completely. In their worldview, they are the older, wiser siblings, entrusted with maintaining the balance of the world through ritual payments they call pagamentos, made at sacred sites across the mountains. And it is we, the industrial younger brother, who are the destroyers. They restrict outsiders from their higher territory. They guard their sacred places against the coca growers, the armed groups, and the tomb looters who have plagued the region. The stakes of the Kogi are not their survival alone, though armed conflict and looting genuinely threaten them. The stakes are the message. Here is a civilization that never fell. It only hid and endured, and it has walked out of the deep past not to be studied, but to tell the rest of us that the mountain is dying, and that when it dies, so do we. The Inca, as it happens, made the same choice to withdraw and resist, and unlike Paititi, their hidden capital was entirely real. Number 6. Vilcabamba. In 1572, in the Great Square of Cusco, the Spanish executed a young man named Tupac Amaru. He was the last independent ruler of the Inca, and with his death, the final free remnant of the empire, hidden for a generation in the jungle, was extinguished. To understand what was lost that day, you have to go back into the forest where the Inca had made their last stand. Vilcabamba was the last independent Inca stronghold, established after the Spanish captured Cusco in 1533. Manco Inca Yupanqui, who had begun as a puppet ruler under the conquistadors, turned on them and led a rebellion, then withdrew around 1537 into the remote Vilcabamba region, northwest of the old capital. There, in a corner of montane jungle, he built a new state in miniature, a neo-Inca kingdom that kept its religion, its administration, and its armies alive. It resisted Spanish control for roughly 36 years. The resistance was brutal and personal. Manco Inca himself was murdered in 1544 by Spanish refugees he had sheltered. His sons carried the fight onward, through the reigns of Sairi Tupac, Titu Cusi, and finally Tupac Amaru, whose capture and execution in 1572 ended it all. And then the city that had been their capital simply vanished from outside knowledge, swallowed by the trees. Finding it again became one of the great puzzles of exploration. In 1911, the American explorer Hiram Bingham actually visited the real site, a place called Espiritu Pampa, but he underestimated it and instead crowned Machu Picchu as the lost Vilcabamba, a misidentification that stood for half a century. It was not until 1964 that the explorer Jean Savoy recognized Espiritu Pampa for what it truly was, based on the sheer scale of its ruins. Later work by Vincent Lee and others mapped the site and confirmed it as the genuine last capital. Espiritu Pampa lies in lowland montane jungle in the Cusco region at around 1,500 meters. It holds a large plaza, residential compounds, and at the nearby site of Nuestra Hispana, a great white ceremonial rock. Archaeologists found Spanish-style roof tiles there, showing that even in defiant isolation, the Inca had adopted some European techniques. And in 2010, a pre-Inca Wari tomb, dubbed the Lord of Vilcabamba, was discovered nearby, revealing that this hidden corner had been layered with power long before the Inca fled to it. The reason Vilcabamba matters so much to this story is that it is the documented reality behind every Golden Refuge legend. It is proof that a defeated civilization really can withdraw into the jungle, build a hidden capital, and hold out for a generation before the forest closes over it. Its people did not evaporate. They dispersed into the Andean and Amazonian communities, whose Quechua-speaking descendants still live in the region today. Vilcabamba grounds the dream of Paititi and the fantasy of a lost city in hard stone and Spanish tile. But not every hidden city hides in a jungle. Some of them shimmer at the edge of a desert and dissolve when you reach for them. Number 7. Zerzura. Picture explorers in the 1930s, crossing an ocean of golden dunes in battered cars, chasing a city that floats on the horizon, a cluster of white towers ringed by palms that shimmers in the heat and never comes closer. This was Zerzura, the lost oasis of the Sahara, and grown men gave years of their lives to it. Zerzura is a legendary white city or oasis, said to lie in the Libyan desert, west of the Nile. Its earliest description comes from a medieval Arabic manuscript, the Kitab al-Kanuz, the Book of Hidden Pearls, which tells of a white city where a king and queen sleep, guarded and full of treasure. Above the gate, the story says, is a carved bird holding a key in its beak. It is the kind of detail that lodges in the imagination and does not let go. In the early 20th century, Zerzura became an obsession for a particular breed of European desert explorer. In 1930, at Wadi Halfa on the Nile, a group of them founded what they half-jokingly called the Zerzura Club. Its members and associates included Ralph Bagnold, a British soldier and scientist who pioneered motorized desert travel and effectively founded the study of how sand dunes move, and Laszlo Almazy, the Hungarian aristocrat and explorer, later immortalized, in fictional form, as the title character of the English Patient. They pushed Model T Fords across sand seas that had never been mapped, filling in the last blank spaces on the charts of the world. And here the search delivered something far stranger than a fairy tale city. In 1933, Almazy, hunting Zerzura in the Vilcabamba Plateau, came upon a cave whose walls were painted with human figures that appeared to be swimming. The Cave of Swimmers, as it became known, held rock art roughly 10,000 years old, and those swimmers were the clue to a lost world that was absolutely real. There had once been water here. During the period scientists call the African Humid Period, or the Green Sahara, the desert was not desert at all. It held lakes and rivers, grassland and cattle herders and hunters, and it only dried out around 5,000 years ago as the monsoon rains retreated south. This is the genuine turn in Zerzura's story. Some scholars argue the legend itself may be a folk memory of that vanished green world, of genuinely fertile wadis that still, on rare occasions after rain, flush briefly with life in the Vilcabamba. The lost city may be a mirage, but the lost landscape underneath it, with its buried settlements and its herds painted on stone, was as real as the sand that buried it. The fringe end, of course, ties Zerzura to Atlantis and to lost supercivilizations, claims with nothing to support them. But the true stakes of Zerzura are more poetic than any of that. A generation of explorers chased a city that never existed, and, in chasing it, mapped the last unknown quarter of the desert, and rediscovered a green Sahara full of people who had themselves vanished. Their desert skills would soon be turned to war in the long-range desert group of the Second World War. From a lost landscape, we cross now to a lost lineage, a human branch clinging to a chain of islands in the Bay of Bengal. Number 8. The Jarawa. On a road cut through the forest of the Andaman Islands, a hunter with a bow stands at the tree line and watches a bus roll past, its windows crowded with tourists lifting their phones to photograph him. He belongs to a people whose ancestors may have made one of the first great journeys out of Africa, tens of thousands of years ago. He is being treated like an animal in a safari park. The Jarawa, who call themselves the Ayong, are an indigenous people of the Andaman Islands, in the Bay of Bengal, part of India's Andaman and Nicobar territory. They are one of several Andamanese peoples, alongside the Great Andamanese, the Onge, and the entirely uncontacted Sentinelese. And their ancestry runs staggeringly deep. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests the Andamanese descend from an early southern route migration out of Africa, one of the first dispersals of modern humans, possibly reaching these islands many tens of thousands of years ago. Their lineages are among the most divergent branches of the human family tree, living evidence of how ancient and how varied our species really is. There are only a few hundred Jarawa, and they live traditionally by hunting, fishing, and gathering, using bows, gathering honey, hunting wild pig. For most of recorded history, they defended their isolation with force, and only around 1997 did they begin to allow cautious, peaceful interactions with the outside. That shift, which might sound like progress, opened the door to disaster. The Andaman Trunk Road, driven straight through their territory, brought poachers stealing their game, settlers pressing on their land, and the grotesque spectacle of human safari tourism in which outsiders paid to gawk at them. India's Supreme Court has had to order restrictions on the road and on tourist contact to try to protect them. The Andamanese speak languages so distinct they are considered a family of their own, unrelated to the tongues of the mainland. And the fate of the Jarawa's neighbors is a warning written in numbers. The Great Andamanese once numbered in the thousands. After colonization and disease, they collapsed to a few dozen. The Onge of Little Andaman declined sharply the same way. This is the immunity gap again, and on these islands it has already nearly finished the job. The Sentinelese, on their own island, remain completely uncontacted to this day, which is exactly why we are leaving them aside here. The turn in the Jarawa's story is the cruelest kind. For the Jarawa, peace was more dangerous than war. As long as they fought off outsiders, they stayed sealed away and safe. The moment they began to let people in, they exposed a 60,000-year-old lineage, with no immunity to measles or influenza, to the full weight of the modern world. Their forest is a legally protected reserve, but law is thin against a virus or a poacher. The stakes of the Jarawa are almost unbearable when you hold them properly. This is not a metaphor for the deep past. This is a living branch of humanity's very first migration, still hunting with bows on their islands, and it could be ended by a single cough. Some lost civilizations, though, turn out to have been real all along, and their descendants are still right where the legend said they would be. Number 9. The Lost City of Z. In 1925, a British colonel named Percy Fawcett walked into the Mato Grosso jungle of Brazil with his son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Ramel, searching for a lost city he called simply Z. None of them ever walked out. Their disappearance became one of the great unsolved mysteries of exploration, and over the following decades it pulled other would-be rescuers into the same forest, where a number of them also died or vanished. Fawcett was not a crank, or not only a crank. He was a surveyor for the Royal Geographical Society, who had mapped Amazon borders in the early 20th century, and knew the jungle as well as any European alive. His belief in Z rested partly on a real document, known as Manuscript 512, held in the Brazilian National Library and dated 1753, which described the ruins of a lost stone city found by Portuguese explorers. Fawcett fused that with his own mystical convictions, some of them tinged with Atlantis, into a conviction that a great ancient civilization lay waiting in the Xingu. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus was that Fawcett had chased a fantasy, that the Amazon's poor soils could never have supported a complex society. And then, from the late 1990s, an American archaeologist named Michael Heckenberger began working in the Upper Xingu with the Kwikuro people, and what he found rewrote the map. Around the region of Kuhikugu, near the headwaters of the Xingu River, he documented clustered towns connected by wide roads, ringed by defensive moats, laid out with plazas and causeways aligned to the compass. These were garden cities, engineered landscapes with fish weirs, and managed forest. And at their height, they may have supported tens of thousands of people, before European diseases swept up the rivers after 1500 and hollowed them out. This is the vindication, and it is real. The Amazon was not an empty green desert. It was densely settled and heavily shaped by human hands. Since Heckenberger's work, LiDAR surveys have revealed thousands of geometric earthworks across the region, including vast fields of geoglyphs in the Brazilian state of Acre. And in 2024, researchers announced an enormous network of ancient cities in the Upano Valley of Ecuador. The pattern keeps repeating. The forest is full of lost architecture. So the reframing is this. Fawcett was wrong in every detail and right in his core intuition. There was no single golden city called Zed. There was something arguably more remarkable, a whole network of interconnected earthwork towns, a genuine Amazonian civilization that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. And crucially, it never entirely vanished. The Kwikuro who helped Heckenberger map those ruins are the living descendants of the people who built them, still in the Xingu, now protected within an indigenous park. The stakes of Z are the stakes of memory itself. A true civilization was erased by disease so completely that its own existence became a fairy tale, and yet its grid still lies legible beneath the trees, and its children still live above it. Our final hidden kingdom, though, may be the one that was never quite a place at all. Number 10. Shambhala. In the 1920s, a Russian painter and mystic named Nicholas Roerich led a caravan across some of the most forbidding country on earth, the Altai, the Gobi, the high passes of the Himalaya, searching, among other things, for a hidden kingdom he believed lay somewhere beyond the mountains. He was chasing Shambhala, and he was far from the first and far from the last. Shambhala is a hidden kingdom in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, described in the texts of the Kalachakra, the Wheel of Time. It is depicted as a land shaped like a lotus of 8 petals, ringed by a wall of snow mountains, ruled by a line of enlightened kings, and hidden from the ordinary world. The Kalachakra tradition reached Tibet around the 11th century, and it carries a prophecy that in a future age of decline and war, a final king of Shambhala will ride out to defeat the forces of ignorance and usher in a golden age. It is a civilization that is also a promise about the end of history. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Western esotericists and theosophists seized on Shambhala and wove it into their own occult systems. Roerich's expeditions blended art, spiritual searching, and no small amount of geopolitics. The legend seeped into popular culture, most famously inspiring James Hilton's 1933 novel Lost Horizon, which gave the world its parallel paradise, Shangri-La. There is even a dark thread, the interest that occult-minded factions in Nazi Germany took in Tibet, with an SS expedition traveling there in 1938 and 39, hunting, among other things, for hidden origins. But the question that matters for this list is whether Shambhala is a place you could actually walk to. And here the answer splits in a fascinating way. Tibetan tradition itself treats Shambhala as partly a physical hidden land, and partly a Bayul, a sacred hidden valley that can only be reached through spiritual attainment. And Bayul are not entirely imaginary. They are a real category in Himalayan tradition, and some of them correspond to genuine remote valleys in places like the Nepalese Himalaya. There are real hidden enclaves too, like the walled kingdom of Mustang, or Lo, a pocket of Tibetan culture sealed away in the Nepalese mountains that feel as though they stepped out of the legend. Mainstream scholarship is clear that Shambhala is a mytho-spiritual concept rather than an undiscovered city on a map. Its lotus of 8 petals geography is a mandala, a symbolic diagram of the cosmos, not a survey you could follow. And yet seekers have never stopped looking, from the 19th century Hungarian scholar Alexander Choma de Koros, who tied his search for Shambhala to the origins of his own people, to modern travelers. The fringe places it underground, in a hollow earth realm called Agartha, with nothing to support the idea. Shambhala closes this list at the mythic pole of the whole spectrum. It is the hidden civilization that is always one valley beyond the map, that dissolves into a mandala the moment you reach it, and yet whose pursuit led real people across real mountains to real hidden kingdoms. It is the purest form of the thing that connects everyone on this list. The conviction that somewhere out there, just past the edge of what we have charted, something older and untouched is still waiting. Step back from the 10 of them, and a single engine becomes visible, humming underneath every story. The thing that lets a prehistoric way of life survive into the present is, above all, geography. Jungle, desert, mountain, and island are not just settings. They are shields. The Toromona had the headwaters of Madidi. The Kogi had the vertical walls of the Sierra Nevada. The Jarawa had the sea. Each barrier bought time that flat, open, accessible land would never have granted. The second force is trauma. Almost none of these peoples chose isolation in a vacuum. They were pushed into it by the rubber boom that emptied the Amazon, by the conquest that toppled the Inca and the Tirona, by waves of disease that arrived before the conquerors themselves. To vanish was a strategy, a decision made by people who understood exactly what the outside world was and wanted no part of it. That is the point worth holding on to. Isolation, in these cases, is not the absence of knowledge. It is a choice built on bitter knowledge, and running through all of it is the same lethal thread, the immunity gap. The very isolation that preserved these peoples left their bodies defenseless against the ordinary germs the rest of us carry, without a thought. It is why forced contact killed the Ayoreo, why it gutted the great Andamanese, why a single flu could still erase the Mashco-Piro. The wall that protected them is also the wall that makes them fragile. This is why the modern no-contact reserves, in Bolivia and Peru and Paraguay and India, are such a strange and profound experiment, an attempt by nations to simply leave people be. And it is why the moral picture has quietly inverted. The peoples we once filed under primitive turn out, in the case of the Kogi and the Kwikuro, to be the last stewards of places and knowledge we are busy destroying. Some of these civilizations vanished, like the Toromona may have. Some are merely hidden, like Paititi may be. And some never truly ended at all. They only stepped back, high into the mountains or deep into the trees, and endured. What remains genuinely unknown here is not a footnote. It is the whole horizon of the subject. We do not know whether the Toromona are alive, absorbed into their neighbors, or already gone, and the reserve set aside for them may be guarding a forest with no one in it. We do not know whether the Mashco-Piro and the Ayoreo will be contacted on their own terms or on the bulldozers. We do not know whether an intact city on the scale of the Paititi legend still waits somewhere under the Amazon canopy, though every new LiDAR survey makes the forest feel more crowded with ghosts, not less. We cannot say how many earthwork cities remain unmapped, or how deep Andamanese ancestry truly runs, or what became of all the people who once herded cattle across a green Sahara. And there is a harder question underneath all of it, the one the scientists and governments genuinely wrestle with. Who has the right to decide whether contact happens at all? Every answer carries a cost, measured in cultures or in lives. The Amazon has already forced archaeology to tear up its old assumptions and admit that civilization took forms it never expected, dense and engineered, and hidden in the last place anyone thought to look. That is the thought to carry away from all 10 of these. The past is not always buried under our feet, waiting for a shovel. Sometimes it is simply hidden, just past the edge of the map, behind a wall of trees, or a shimmer of desert heat, or a ring of snow mountains. And sometimes, on a riverbank in Peru or a ridge above the clouds in Colombia, it is not only still out there, it is looking back at us. If the deep past still has questions for you, there is another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.